You're in the middle of a conversation, and everything seems fine. You're talking, laughing, explaining something, maybe even feeling comfortable for a moment. And then, it happens. You say something. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obviously wrong. But the second it leaves your mouth, something inside you shifts. Why did I say that? You keep talking, but part of you is no longer there. It's already replaying what you just said. The tone. The timing. The way it might have sounded. Was that too much? Did I overshare? Did that come out wrong? You try to stay present, but now you're split. One part of you is still in the conversation. The other is analyzing it in real time. You start adjusting. Speaking a little less. Choosing your words more carefully. Softening your tone. Trying to fix something that may not even be broken. And the strangest part is, nothing actually happened. No one reacted badly. No one said anything. The conversation keeps going. But inside you, it already feels like you crossed a line. Like you were a little too open. A little too expressive. A little too much. And when it's over, you don't just move on. You replay it. On the way home. In the shower. Lying in bed. That one moment keeps coming back. I shouldn't have said that. I always do this. I think I messed it up. And somewhere in the middle of all that, a quiet thought starts to form. What if just being myself is what keeps ruining things? If you slow down and really look at what's happening in those moments, it's rarely about what you said. It's about what your mind does right after you say it. Because the shift doesn't happen in the conversation itself. It happens internally, almost instantly. 1 second you're speaking naturally, the next you're watching yourself from the outside. And once that shift happens, everything changes. You're no longer just talking. You're monitoring. You start noticing your tone, your expressions, your words as if they need to be evaluated in real time. You become aware of how you might be coming across instead of simply being there. And that awareness doesn't feel neutral. It feels risky. Like something about you just became exposed. Maybe it was the way you laughed too loudly. Maybe it was how much you shared about something personal. Maybe it was a comment that felt slightly too honest, too direct, too unfiltered. Whatever it was, your system reacts the same way. That might have been too much. And from that moment on, the interaction stops being something you're experiencing and starts becoming something you're managing. You might start talking less. You might try to balance things out by asking more questions. You might soften your tone, make a joke, or quickly change the subject. Not because anyone asked you to, but because something inside you is trying to correct the emotional impact of what just happened. And the strange part is, you often don't even know if anything actually did happen. No one told you that you were too much. No one said you crossed a line. No one reacted in a way that clearly signals something went wrong. But your body doesn't wait for confirmation. It reacts to possibility. The possibility that you were too open. Too expressive. Too real. And once that possibility appears, it's enough. Because your nervous system isn't trying to figure out if something is objectively wrong. It's trying to prevent something from becoming wrong. So it moves quickly. It adjusts. It tightens. It pulls you back just enough to stay safe. And this is where the pattern becomes exhausting. Because you're not just having conversations, you're constantly recalibrating yourself inside them. You're watching how you come across. You're anticipating how things might be received. You're trying to stay within a version of yourself that feels acceptable. And the moment you step slightly outside of that version, even briefly, the correction begins. This is why it can feel like you can't fully relax around certain people. Not because they're doing something obvious, but because something in you is always slightly alert. Always checking. Always asking. Am I saying too much right now? Should I tone this down? Was that too honest? Did that sound weird? And when those questions start running in the background, the interaction changes. It becomes more controlled. More filtered. Less natural. You're still there, but not fully. There's always a part of you holding back, adjusting, shaping what comes out next. And over time, this creates something subtle but powerful. A growing distance between who you are, and how you allow yourself to show up. Because instead of expressing yourself freely, you begin expressing a version of yourself that feels safer. More measured. More careful. Less intense. A version that is less likely to mess things up. But that version comes at a cost. Because every time you adjust yourself to avoid being too much, you are also stepping slightly away from what felt natural in that moment. And that distance is what you feel afterward. That's why the exhaustion doesn't just come from the conversation. It comes from the constant internal movement. The monitoring. The correcting. The holding back. All of it happening quietly, in the background, while you're trying to stay engaged on the surface. And when it's over, your body finally releases that effort. Which is why you might feel tired, heavy, or even slightly ashamed, without being able to point to a clear reason. Because what you're carrying isn't just what happened. It's everything you think might have happened. And that leads to a deeper, more uncomfortable question that begins to take shape. If nothing actually went wrong, why does it feel like I need to fix something every time I'm just being myself? To understand why this reaction feels so immediate, so automatic, we have to look at something deeper than the moment itself. Because what's happening now didn't start now. It's something your nervous system learned long before you were aware of it. As a child, you didn't learn about yourself in isolation. You learned about yourself through reactions. Through how people responded to you. Through what was welcomed, and what wasn't. Through the subtle shifts that happened after you expressed something real. Maybe you were expressive. Curious. Emotional. Talkative. Direct. And at times, those parts of you were met with warmth. With attention. With connection. But at other times, something changed. A parent might have seemed overwhelmed. A caregiver might have become distant. A conversation might have suddenly felt tense. Not dramatically. Not in a way that would stand out as a clear moment. But enough for your body to notice. And when you're a child, noticing is everything. Because you don't interpret these moments as, they are having a bad day. You interpret them as information about you. Something about what I just did changed the way they responded. And that creates a question, even if you don't have the words for it yet. Was that too much? This is where the pattern begins. Not as a belief. But as a sensitivity. You start paying closer attention. To tone. To timing. To reactions. You notice when someone pulls back slightly. You notice when energy shifts. You notice when something feels different after you express yourself. And because connection matters so much at that stage, your system begins to adjust. If being more expressive sometimes leads to disconnection, maybe being a little less expressive feels safer. If saying exactly what you think creates tension, maybe softening it works better. If sharing too much seems to overwhelm someone, maybe holding back keeps things stable. Again, none of this is conscious. It's adaptive. It's your nervous system learning how to stay connected. And the more it works, the more it becomes automatic. You learn, quietly, which parts of you are easier for others to receive. And which parts feel riskier. Maybe your excitement was a little too intense. Maybe your honesty felt a little too direct. Maybe your emotions felt a little too visible. So you begin shaping those parts. Not eliminating them, but adjusting them. Turning the volume down just enough. And over time, something subtle happens. Your expression becomes linked to outcome. You start feeling that how you show up influences whether connection stays or shifts. And once that link is formed, your system begins monitoring it constantly. Because now, expression is not just expression. It's something that needs to be managed. This is where the real pattern forms. You express, you scan, you evaluate, you adjust. And that loop becomes faster and faster over time. Until eventually, it happens in real time. Exactly like it does now. You say something. And immediately, you scan. Not because you want to. But because your body learned that scanning matters. And when you scan, you don't just look at what actually happened. You look at what might have happened. You imagine how it could have sounded. How it could have been interpreted. How it could have landed. And because your system is trying to protect connection, it doesn't wait for confirmation. It prepares for correction. That's why the regret comes so quickly. Not because you truly believe you did something wrong. But because your system is trained to assume responsibility early, before anything escalates. It's a preventative reflex. And over time, that reflex becomes so strong that even neutral moments can trigger it. You might say something completely normal. And still feel like you need to pull back. Because the feeling isn't coming from the present. It's coming from a learned association. Expression can lead to disconnection. And if expression can lead to disconnection, then it makes sense that your body would try to regulate it. Even now. Even when you're with people who aren't reacting negatively. Even when nothing actually goes wrong. Because your system is not reacting to reality alone. It's reacting to patterns. Patterns where being fully yourself sometimes felt unpredictable. Sometimes felt risky. Sometimes felt like something you needed to adjust quickly. And that creates something very specific inside you. A constant awareness of how much of yourself is showing. Am I talking too much? Am I being too honest? Am I sharing too much? Am I taking up too much space? And those questions don't come from nowhere. They come from a history where the answer didn't always feel safe. So now, instead of expressing freely, you express with awareness. And awareness, when it becomes constant, turns into pressure. Because you're no longer just being, you're regulating how much of yourself is allowed to be seen. And the moment you feel like you crossed that invisible line, even slightly, the correction begins. You replay. You analyze. You regret. You imagine what you should have said instead. And this doesn't just affect what happens after the conversation. It begins to affect what happens during it. You might hesitate before speaking. You might hold things back entirely. You might filter yourself before the words even come out. Not because you don't have something to say. But because part of you is already anticipating the possibility of regret. And anticipation changes behavior. It makes you more careful. More measured. More controlled. Which can create another layer of tension. Because now there's a gap between what you feel and what you express. And maintaining that gap takes effort. Effort that builds quietly over time. Until the interaction ends, and your body finally releases that constant monitoring. Which is why the exhaustion isn't just emotional. It's cognitive. It's the result of holding multiple versions of yourself at once. The one who wants to express. The one who is watching that expression. And the one who is preparing to correct it. And when those layers collapse at the end of the interaction, what's left is a kind of tiredness that feels deeper than just being socially drained. It feels like something in you was working the entire time. Because it was. And underneath all of this, there is a question that becomes harder to ignore. If expressing yourself feels like something that needs to be controlled, when did being yourself start to feel like something that needed to be corrected? When this pattern continues into adulthood, it doesn't just shape how you feel after conversations. It begins to shape how you enter them, how you move inside them, and how you remember them afterward. Because at some point, the regret stops being a reaction, and starts becoming an expectation. Before you even speak, something in you is already preparing for the possibility that you might have said too much. You might not notice it consciously, but it shows up in small, quiet ways. You hesitate for a fraction of a second before sharing something personal. You edit a sentence in your head before you say it out loud. You hold back a detail, a thought, a reaction, just in case. And that hesitation is important. Because it means part of you is no longer just expressing, it's anticipating the aftermath. Anticipating the replay. The analysis. The regret. And when anticipation enters the interaction, spontaneity begins to fade. You're still present, but now there's a layer of control over everything that comes out. You might choose words more carefully. You might soften your tone before you even know how it will be received. You might avoid saying something that feels true because it also feels risky. Not risky in an obvious way, but risky in that familiar, internal sense. This might be too much. And so, you adjust in advance. Which means the interaction is no longer just about connection. It becomes about prevention. Preventing discomfort. Preventing misinterpretation. Preventing that moment afterward where everything starts replaying in your head. This is where something subtle begins to happen. The version of you that shows up in conversations becomes slightly different from the one that exists internally. You don't stop being yourself completely. But you become a more filtered version of yourself. More measured. More contained. More manageable. And at first, this can feel like control. Like you're improving your communication. Like you're being thoughtful. Like you're avoiding unnecessary tension. But over time, that control starts to feel restrictive. Because you're not just choosing your words, you're choosing how much of yourself is allowed to be visible. And that choice is being made constantly. In real time. Which is why even conversations that go well can still feel exhausting. Because even when nothing goes wrong, your system was still active. Still monitoring. Still adjusting. Still holding back just enough to stay within what feels safe. And the effort of holding back is often invisible. No one sees it. No one knows that there were things you didn't say. Thoughts you didn't express. Reactions you softened before they fully formed. But your body knows. It feels the difference between what you wanted to say and what you actually said. It feels the space between those two things. And holding that space requires energy. This is why, after certain interactions, you don't just feel tired, you feel slightly disconnected from yourself. As if you were there, but not fully. As if you were present, but also managing something in the background the entire time. And when the interaction ends, that background process doesn't stop immediately. It shifts into something else. Replay. You go back through the conversation. Not in a calm, reflective way, but in a searching way. Looking for signs. Did that land well? Did they react differently after I said that? Was there a moment where the energy changed? You might focus on one specific sentence. One moment. One expression. And you replay it over and over, trying to understand it from different angles. What you meant. What it sounded like. What it might have meant to them. And the more you replay it, the more uncertain it can feel. Because now you're no longer working with what actually happened. You're working with possibilities. And possibilities don't have clear answers. Which keeps the loop going. You try to resolve it. To find the right interpretation. To decide whether something was wrong or not. But instead of resolution, you often end up with something else. A feeling. A vague sense that something might not have been right. That you might have crossed a line, even if you don't know where that line is. And when that feeling settles in, the conclusion often follows. I shouldn't have said that. I always do this. I ruin things when I'm just being myself. And that conclusion matters. Because it doesn't stay isolated to that one interaction. It begins to shape the next one. The next time you're about to speak, that memory is there. Not as a clear thought, but as a subtle caution. A reminder that expression can lead to regret. And so, you become more careful. More filtered. More controlled. Which reinforces the pattern. You speak less freely, you monitor more, you still feel uncertain, you still replay, you still regret. And the loop continues. There's another layer here that makes this even more complex. Sometimes, the people you feel this around are not doing anything obviously wrong. They're not criticizing you. They're not rejecting you. They're not telling you that you're too much. And yet, your body reacts as if something needs to be managed. Which can be confusing. Because part of you might think, they're nice. They didn't say anything bad. So why do I feel like this? And this is where the pattern becomes internalized. Because at this point, it's no longer only about how others respond. It's about how your system has learned to respond to yourself. You've learned to watch yourself. To evaluate yourself. To correct yourself. Even in the absence of external feedback. The monitoring has become internal. Which means the pressure doesn't require a trigger anymore. It can activate on its own. You say something, and immediately, you're the one analyzing it. You're the one questioning it. You're the one deciding whether it was too much. And when that happens, something important shifts. The source of tension is no longer the interaction itself. It's the relationship you have with your own expression. A relationship where expression is followed by evaluation. And evaluation is followed by correction. And correction is followed by regret. Which makes being yourself feel complicated. Because it's not just about what you say. It's about everything that comes after. And when that sequence becomes familiar, something else begins to form quietly underneath it. A hesitation to be fully seen. Not because you don't want to connect. But because connection feels tied to control. And control requires effort. Constant, subtle effort. Which is why the question starts to deepen. If being yourself is always followed by this cycle of monitoring and regret, what would it feel like to express something, and not go back to fix it afterward? If we step a little deeper into what's happening here, we begin to see that this isn't just about conversations or social situations. It's about how your mind relates to your own expression. And more specifically, what happens in the moment right after you show something real. Because there is a difference between expressing something, and feeling safe after expressing it. For some people, expression is a closed loop. They speak, the moment passes, and their system moves on. There is no need to go back. No need to review. No need to correct. But for you, expression doesn't close. It stays open. And that open loop is what creates the tension. You say something, and your system doesn't settle. It stays active. It keeps scanning, as if the moment is not finished yet. This is where something important comes in. Your brain is trying to resolve uncertainty. Not just what was said, but how it was received. Because if you think back to how this pattern formed, there were moments where the outcome of your expression wasn't clear. You didn't always know if something landed well. You didn't always get direct feedback. Sometimes the reaction was subtle. A slight shift in tone. A pause. A change in energy. And those subtle shifts were enough to teach your system something very specific. I need to figure this out. So now, every time you express something, your brain tries to complete that unfinished loop. It tries to answer questions that were never clearly answered before. Did that come out right? Did they take it the wrong way? Did I just change something between us? And because those answers are not immediately available, your mind starts generating possibilities. Multiple versions of what might have happened. Multiple interpretations. Multiple outcomes. This is where overthinking begins. Not as a flaw, but as an attempt to create clarity where there is none. Your mind is trying to stabilize the interaction after it's already over. Trying to make sure everything is still okay. Trying to confirm that nothing has shifted. But the more it tries, the less certain it often becomes. Because imagined outcomes don't resolve, they multiply. And this keeps the loop open. This connects to something deeper in how the nervous system works. Your body doesn't just react to what is happening. It reacts to what is unresolved. If something feels complete, your system relaxes. If something feels unfinished, your system stays active. And for you, expression often feels unfinished. Not because something objectively went wrong, but because your system hasn't received a clear signal that everything is still safe. So it keeps working. Replaying. Analyzing. Trying to close the loop. This is why the exhaustion is not just emotional, it's cognitive. You're not just feeling something. You're processing something over and over again without reaching a conclusion. And that continuous processing uses energy. A lot of it. There is another layer here that makes this even more intense. Over time, your mind doesn't just analyze interactions, it begins to anticipate the need to analyze them. Which means the loop starts earlier. Not after the conversation, but during it. You say something, and part of you is already preparing to review it. You're already stepping slightly outside of the moment. Already creating distance between you and what you're expressing. And that distance changes the experience. Because now, you are not just participating. You are observing and evaluating at the same time. This creates a split in attention. Part of you is in the interaction. Part of you is monitoring it. And holding both at once requires effort. Continuous effort. This is why even positive interactions can feel draining. Because your system was never fully at rest. It was active the entire time. Managing not just the interaction, but your place inside it. There is also something important happening with identity here. Over time, when expression is repeatedly followed by correction, your mind begins to associate being yourself with needing adjustment. Not in a harsh way, but in a subtle, continuous way. You begin to feel that your natural way of speaking, reacting, or sharing is something that needs to be refined in real time. And when that becomes familiar, it creates a quiet internal rule. Don't just express, adjust. So even when you're being yourself, there's a layer of modification. A filter. A calibration. You're not fully spontaneous. You're partially shaped in the moment. And this shaping becomes so normal that you might not even notice it anymore. It just feels like how you are. But the cost is that your system never experiences what it's like to express something, and leave it untouched. To say something, and let it be enough. To be seen, without going back to fix the image. And without that experience, your nervous system never learns that expression can be safe on its own. It keeps relying on correction to create safety. But correction never fully resolves the tension. It just shifts it. From what you said, to how you think you should have said it. And so the loop continues. Expression, evaluation, correction, uncertainty, more evaluation. And underneath all of this, there is a deeper mechanism at play. Your mind is trying to protect your relationships. It's trying to prevent misalignment. To avoid saying something that might create distance. To keep connection stable. But in doing so, it places the responsibility for that stability entirely on you. You become the one who monitors. The one who adjusts. The one who corrects. Even when no one asked you to. Even when nothing actually changed. And that responsibility is heavy. Because it means every interaction carries a subtle pressure. Don't get it wrong. And when that pressure is present, even in a small way, your system cannot fully relax. It stays slightly engaged. Slightly careful. Slightly on. And that, slightly, is what drains you. Not in one moment. But across many moments. Across many conversations. Across time. Until something inside you starts asking a different question. Not just, did I say something wrong? But, why does being myself feel like something that needs to be corrected at all? If you've been recognizing yourself in this pattern, there is something important to understand before anything else begins to change. Nothing about this is random. The way your mind reacts after you express yourself, the way it replays, questions, and tries to correct, all of it developed for a reason. It was a way to protect connection. A way to stay close. To stay understood. To stay safe inside relationships that once felt uncertain in small, subtle ways. So the goal now is not to fight this pattern. It's to slowly change what happens after you express something. Because that's where the cycle either continues, or begins to shift. Right now, the sequence is familiar. You say something, you feel a shift, you analyze, you correct, you regret. And that sequence feels automatic. But there is one place inside it where something new can happen. Right after the moment you feel that internal shift. That quiet sensation. I shouldn't have said that. That's the moment. Not later, when you're replaying everything. Not hours after, when the regret is stronger. Right there. Because that's when your system is trying to pull you into the loop. And instead of following it immediately, you can do something very small. You can pause. Not to fix anything. Not to rethink what you said. But just to notice what's happening inside you. The tension. The urge to adjust. The need to go back and correct. And instead of acting on it, even for a few seconds, you stay with yourself. This might feel uncomfortable at first. Because your system is used to resolving that feeling quickly. To analyzing, adjusting, doing something. And now you're not doing that. You're letting the moment exist without immediately trying to fix it. And in that space, something subtle begins to change. You start to experience what it feels like to express something, and not immediately turn against it. To say something, and let it stay as it is. Even if it wasn't perfect. Even if it felt a little too open, a little too honest, a little too much. You let it exist. And when you do that, something important happens. Your energy stays with you. Instead of going outward, into analysis, correction, replay, it begins to settle. You feel less pulled. Less divided. Less caught between what you said and what you think you should have said. And over time, as you repeat this in small moments, your system begins to learn something new. That expression does not automatically require correction. That a moment can be slightly imperfect, and still be safe. That you can say something, feel a reaction inside you, and not have to follow it all the way into regret. And as that learning grows, the loop starts to loosen. Not disappear completely, but soften. You might still notice the thought. That might have been too much. But it doesn't pull you as strongly. It passes more quickly. It doesn't expand into a full replay. And that changes how you experience yourself. Because now, instead of constantly editing who you are in real time, you begin allowing more of yourself to stay. To exist without immediate correction. To be seen without being reshaped afterward. And that creates something you may not have felt in a long time. A sense of continuity. Where who you are inside, and how you show up outside, begin to align more closely. Without constant adjustment in between. This doesn't make you careless. It doesn't mean you stop being thoughtful or aware. It means your awareness is no longer tied to pressure. It becomes something softer. More grounded. More connected to choice rather than fear. You speak because you want to. You share because it feels natural. You respond without immediately stepping outside of yourself to evaluate it. And in that, something else begins to return. Relief. Not dramatic. But quiet. A sense that you don't have to keep going back to fix yourself after every interaction. That you can move forward without carrying the weight of everything you said. That being yourself is not something that needs constant correction. And maybe that's where the shift really begins. Not in changing what you say, but in changing what you do after you say it. Because the moment you stop treating your own expression as something that needs to be fixed, is often the moment you start feeling safe being it.